All right, we'll get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Austin with MnDOT Metro District Center for Community Connections, and I'm the current chair of this Research Council, the CTS Research Council, and on transportation planning and the economy. So today we're welcoming you to our webinar and council meeting, and the topic today is freight and commercial vehicle safety in roundabouts. Just to give you a little background on the councils. The CTS councils provide a forum for both transportation professionals and researchers to exchange information on current transportation issues and trends. It's really important for researchers and practitioners to work together. This brings together both university and faculty and staff with practitioners from the public and private sectors. And we recommend direction and participate in improving the center's research, education, engagement programs. There are 4 research councils with various focus areas and another council for engagement and education. And if you're interested to learn more about the councils, I believe Sam's putting a link in the chat. So it's pretty impressive. We already have 39 attendees, and I think about 100 people registered. So a few more may trickle in. It's like, wow, late Friday afternoon or Friday afternoon right before a holiday weekend. So it's great to see that this is an important topic. Today's webinar features a recent MnDOT effort to evaluate the safety of heavy commercial motor vehicles at roundabouts. In addition, speakers from SRF will present their freight-related work, including the importance of supply chains in Minnesota for medical technology, agriculture, forestry, and the minerals industry. We selected this topic for a couple of reasons. CTS's theme for the year is unpacking freight from producers to front doors. And, our council is planning an economy, so freight is an important part of our economy, and it's important to consider how we support our freight systems in our transportation systems. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my vice chair of the council, Paul Morris, who is co-facilitating this webinar. Paul, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and kick us off the webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here. Yeah, we're very excited to share this event with you here today. I am a director at SRF Consulting Group, where I lead our policy and system studies practice, and also contribute to a variety of research, both in academic and implementation capacities here. So very honored to be a part of the council and to help organize events just like this one for you. I'm going to go through just a couple of housekeeping items here before we introduce our presentations and the presenters here. First off, the Zoom webinar is equipped with a question and answer feature. So you'll see that at the bottom of your screen, and you're welcome to enter questions at any time. Some of those can be answered in the chat. Otherwise, we'll log those so that the presenters can answer them during the question and answer time. This event is also authorized to receive PDH credits, both for engineers and planners. So we certainly encourage you to do that. And the form for that will be entered into the chat. So please let us know if you have any other questions about that. And finally, we want to give a special welcome to students that are participating in the activity today. So if you are a current student, we invite you to enter your name and any other information about your program in the chat, just so you can share with the professional network that's online here who you are and start a networking opportunity that way. So to jump into the speakers and presentation materials today, I want to acknowledge James DeSoto and Sam Duville from CTS, who have done a ton of work in the background to organize this event and make sure all the pieces are going to work right for us today. So thank you, Sam and James. Diving into the specifics here, Lisa mentioned a little bit that this is Mark Wagner's presentation is based on MnDOT research about the safety of commercial motor vehicles at roundabouts. Specifically, an issue was observed where commercial motor vehicles were experiencing rollover crashes at roundabouts, and that this was generating a lot of concern among the freight community as well as the general public. And so this work took a deep dive into some of those issues and really made some comparisons between the performance of roundabouts and signalized intersections. So Mark will be sharing the findings of that work, concerns about roundabouts, but also demonstrating how they remain very safe type of intersection control for all types of vehicles, including freight. The second presentation that we'll hear is from a colleague at SRF, Mark Burnt, who will share about some of the freight-related work that he's involved, particularly related to supply chains serving many of the industries that Lisa mentioned just a moment ago here. And I also want to highlight that Mark's presentation will include an audience poll, and you'll have an opportunity to share ideas that you have about future research needs related to freight, supply chains, and really anything that touches on this. And I just want to say on behalf of the Planning and Economy Council that that's extremely valuable for us, as one of the functions that we help with is developing those research needs statements so that they can be funded in future cycles here. So to introduce our first presenter, Mark Wagner has worked with MnDOT's Office of Traffic Engineering Safety since 2020, and his work includes administration and distribution of Highway Safety Improvement Plan funding, county and statewide systemic safety planning, research and evaluations, and crash analyses. So Mark, thank you so much for sharing with us today, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Paul. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going. All right, we good to go?
Yes, we see your screen. Go ahead, Mark.
All right, perfect. All right, so as Paul mentioned, this is a presentation about an evaluation of traffic safety for heavy commercial vehicles at roundabouts. So I'm going to take a bigger picture look here at first and talk about the upcoming 2025 to 2029 Strategic Highway Safety Plan. So this is not final yet, it's still in draft form, but it's very much close to the end, and we can still talk about it pretty conclusively here. So in this latest plan, the crash data analysis that we did showed about 3% of fatal and serious injury crashes involved commercial vehicles. And commercial vehicles are one of the connected focus areas, which also includes areas like older and younger drivers and work zones. And connected areas represent a small relative proportion of severe crashes, but they do tend to be interwoven with the bigger ones that we see, such as speed and inattention and intersections. And sometimes what that means is that by making investments in safety for these connected areas, then we can support the bigger strategies. So the speed control that can come with a roundabout can also help to address both, safety for those connected areas, but then it also helps with that bigger picture of improving intersection safety and speed related crashes as well. The SHSP is full of strategies for the different focus areas and tactics to help with those strategies. And then key tactics are something that are especially important for the strategy. And what you're seeing on the screen is one of the strategies for the commercial vehicle connected focus area. And I picked this one because the key tactic includes designing and implementing roadway geometric features to reduce severe crashes for motor vehicles. It doesn't specifically indicate roundabouts in the text because there are other things for commercial vehicles that can be used to improve their safety that may be easier or more applicable than roundabouts. But at the same time, I think what this evaluation showed or will show in the presentation too is that roundabouts are a good safety strategy for commercial vehicles as well. So the evaluation itself was driven by the stakeholder concerns that Paul talked about in the introduction. And we wanted to take a bigger look at the safety of heavy commercial vehicles at roundabouts using both previous research nationally and then the crash data that we had for the past 5 years. And then we wanted to take a look at roundabouts compared to traffic signals, because what we heard from stakeholders most frequently is, well, why don't you just put up a signal? Roundabouts aren't good for trucks. The signal is easier to understand. It's a lot safer. So that's the bread and butter of the comparison we wanted to do. And ultimately, we really wanted to look at the question of whether heavy commercial vehicles are more prone to rollovers in roundabouts. Were the stories we hearing anecdotal, or was there data to support that argument as well? I had an extra highlight in that slide. So for the past research, the Transportation Research International documentation was used to search for national research. And I think we came out with about 9 applicable studies that really looked at rollovers at roundabouts in heavy commercial vehicles. Some of the conclusions were related to geometry, vehicle factors, or driver behavior, which, I mean, honestly, I think that covers just about every roadway crash, if you think about it. But just the way the circulatory roadway was sloped could affect rollover risk. The wider circulatory roadway that you get at a multi-lane roundabout is sometimes easier for a heavy commercial vehicle to navigate than a single lane roundabout, just because there is more pavement to work with, even if that means that a semi has to straddle both lanes in the circulating roadway. Other, important things: navigating that circulatory roadway at an appropriate speed really manage rollover risk. And then, weirdly enough, I thought this was really interesting. Partially loaded trucks were the most stable. Empty ones and fully loaded trucks happen to have the higher rollover risks at roundabouts. Fully loaded makes sense because the higher center of gravity. The empty one was an interesting conclusion, I thought. And I couldn't really find a good explanation for that. So I think it is either just a quirk of the data or something that just hasn't been figured out yet. There were 107 roundabouts that we selected for this evaluation. So we looked at our statewide database that we had, and we whittled it down based on the criteria that you see on the screen. So we wanted them to be operational by 2017. And there's another purpose for that related to this evaluation, but the primary one was we wanted to look at the last 5 years of crash data we had. So that would have been the years 2018 to 2022. So we wanted all the roundabouts in the analysis to be in place for those 5 years. We wanted to get sites that had an actual recorded heavy commercial ADT volume. We did include some sites that didn't, but if there were, say, an Amazon warehouse or another big truck generator nearby, we would still sometimes choose those sites. We wanted them to be on the more major roadway systems and not in primarily residential areas. That ended up being kind of subjective based on what the commercial use was and what the land use for the residential area was nearby, but those were still relatively rare sites in the analysis. And then for the signalized comparison, we used pretty much the same criteria. And then we ended up with 95 sites that were signalized. And these were chosen pretty much from MnDOT's internal crash toolkit that we use. I think we did use the traffic mapping application to look at those heavy commercial ADTs to see if they were available. But then also, there was some, I guess, hunting and pecking that we had our student workers do to look for good sites off the trunk highway network as well. So what analyses did we do in this evaluation? So the data was from 2017 to 2022. We basically put a bubble of 500 feet around the roundabouts and the traffic signals. And then we would filter out any non-reportable or unrelated crashes. So if that bubble happened to catch a crash in a parking lot or on a side street or parallel access road, somehow we would cut those out and just focus on the ones that were related to that intersection itself. And then we also looked at crash rate by both overall million entering vehicles and then per million entering heavy commercial vehicles. And then we did break the crash data down to look at some of the most common characteristics for crashes that were associated with those heavy commercial vehicle accidents. Quick overview of the data. So I already talked about the number of sites and just some high level numbers of about how much volume we had entering overall, and then commercial vehicle entering volume, the crash numbers that we had. And then overall crash rate, which looks like a lot, but when you're talking about roundabouts especially, the crash numbers can still be kind of high overall because of the high number of property damage or low severity crashes that we have at those locations. This is the comparison itself between roundabouts and traffic signals. So basically green is a good thing. Green means it either, that category won the comparison in a way, or it just means we saw a reduction in crash numbers. So when we're looking at the K and A, those fatal and serious injury crashes, we're looking at 3 overall out of almost, roughly 200 sites in this evaluation. So very low numbers. Take those percentages with a big grain of salt. I think the meat of this really is also looking at those B and C crashes, those minor injury or suspected injury crashes. And we see the bigger reductions or the lower numbers, not reductions, the lower numbers at roundabouts compared to signals for those. And I think what that kind of tells us is that the lower speeds entering roundabouts are making those more higher injury crashes into lower injury crashes, because when the vehicles do collide, it's not at a 90-degree angle. It's not at a higher speed like a car running a red light hitting something would be. And so it's a severity shift we've seen consistently at roundabouts when they're installed. And I think that this kind of continues to show that. And these numbers are just for the heavy commercial vehicles as well. So even for those bigger vehicles, I think we're still seeing that severity shift where the crashes are usually property damage or lower severity. So the next part, so that was just the crash data comparison. The next part was looking at whether or not we do see more rollovers at roundabouts. And in the initial set of roundabouts and traffic signal control sites, we did see an effect there. So about 10% of the heavy commercial crashes, or 15 of them, were rollover crashes. And I'll just go back a couple slides. So as you can see here at roundabouts, in this table, we had 164 heavy commercial vehicle crashes in the data set. So 15 of those, so 10, 11% were rollovers. And at the traffic signal sites, we only saw 1. So much lower percentage. Excuse me. And the traffic signal one was just a property damage. There were no injuries involved. At the roundabouts, we did see more injuries with the rollovers. And one was a fatality. If you look at the crash report, it's unclear as to whether or not it was a medical event that caused the fatality or the crash itself. So it's a bit of a gray area, but it would be a severe crash nonetheless. So the other interesting things of these 15 crashes, about half of them were just at 2 what I'll call problem child roundabouts. Highway 7 and CSA 10 in the Southwest Metro, I think Carver County, had I think 4 of them, and then down in Worthington, there's one roundabout on Highway 59 that had 3 more. So if you took those out, the numbers would look a lot better, but the analysis is what it is. And those sites did have a lot of rollover crashes with heavy commercial vehicles. It's also worth mentioning those are some of the older roundabouts in the state. They were installed or in the early 2010s or the late 2000s. I like to lovingly, jokingly call that Obama 1. So what we heard from our geometric design standards unit, GDSU, was that since 2018, we don't know if we've seen the same effect on rollovers with roundabouts because they changed some of their design standards. One of the bigger things is going from like a more of a flat edge curb to more of a sloped curb. So think about like a sidewalk curb versus a driveway curb. The driveway one is a lot more sloped, it's more mountable. So just changing that curb type and then some of the other design standards in the circulating road in 2018 was meant to address these rollover concerns. And when we looked at another 181 roundabouts, just kind of scattershot, nothing, not specifically selected based on the criteria that I used for the first 107 roundabouts. But when we looked at a few more roundabouts, we did see a much lower percentage of rollover crashes and a lower injury shift in that as well. So I think that suggests that those standards have helped reduce the rollover crashes, both in incidence and severity. So, really like what we've done is kind of learned a lesson from those first rollover crashes at those early roundabouts, is that there were things we could change to improve the safety as well. And then just some breakdown. So just based on, the crash reports, what did we see that were maybe some interesting things? So just in the basic type of crash, at roundabouts, side swipe was the most common reported type. That makes sense. If a semi and a vehicle are entering a roundabout side by side, that car may not be aware the truck might want to or need to use more than the circulating lane they're in, at which point we're probably going to get that side swipe crash. It's low severity, but those are fairly common in roundabouts. And then at the traffic signal, you have the rear end and the angle, which are two types we generally see with traffic signals. So the highlighted ones are the ones that I thought were kind of quirky or interesting or worth discussing. Angle crashes at roundabouts theoretically don't happen. An angle crash is supposed to be really like a right angle or a T or a T-bone crash. At a roundabout, they really are always more glancing blows, even if they are in that 70 to 80 degree range. So, the officer reports this angle, and there's nothing against the reporting officers, but I think that the fact that they were reported as angles means they probably were something more like a side swipe at a larger angle instead of that pure angle crash. And then when we look at the most harmful event frequency, a motor vehicle being in transport is usually the most harmful event for a crash. That's not going to surprise anybody. But again, that overturn rollover percentage almost exactly matches what we saw in the data set when I talked about it previously, was, about 10%. Why that's 9% and I found 10%, I don't exactly know, but it is kind of based on crash reports and narratives. So there just could be some discrepancy there in the calculations. Vehicle configuration frequency. So was it a truck, semi-truck? Was it a truck pulling a trailer? Was it a single unit? I don't think it's going to surprise anybody that these four configurations are the ones most common in heavy commercial vehicle crashes. What I did think was interesting is there's a percentage separation in trucks pulling trailers for both between roundabouts and traffic signals. So it does seem like it's more of a common thing in roundabouts for that truck pulling a trailer to be involved in a crash versus at a traffic signal. And then for cargo body type, flatbeds compared to signals were really a more frequent occurrence at roundabouts. I don't know if that's because of, due to turn radiuses or other difficulties navigating or just some kind of quirk. We're dealing with very small numbers here, but it is interesting that at a roundabout it's 13% of crashes versus at a signal it's 5%. And they're really, all the characteristics are the same. So for some reason it stands out at roundabouts there. And then last, this is another funny crash reporting quirk. Some reporting officers have called going through a roundabout negotiating a curve, which I get it, but at the same time, this is purely an intersection crash. So negotiating a curve would be a full roadway geometric curve. So it's just kind of an interesting finding. If you think about it, these negotiating occur crashes are most likely those turning left crashes, which would bring that, into the 20% for turning left, which at a roundabout, again, it shouldn't really surprise anybody too much that a truck making a left turn, they're going to need to use more space. They're probably going to be more likely to make contact with another vehicle that may not know that they need all that room to make a left turn, even when that vehicle the heavy commercial vehicle is using the truck apron to help. So what conclusions could we draw from this study? What our data says is that for fatal and serious injury crashes overall, we're looking at about a 47% lower incidence at roundabouts compared to signals. We have those lower rates of minor and suspected injury crashes. Again, I'll say it again, it's the severity shift. Roundabouts are usually going to drive a shift to lower severity crashes at the intersection, and I think that's what we saw here as well. The question of, do roundabouts cause more heavy commercial vehicle rollovers? In all fairness, yes, that was not just anecdotal. They really did cause more rollovers than a standard type of intersection. But that, I think, is something that as time has gone on, MnDOT and other agencies installing roundabouts have done a much better job addressing. I think I showed, since 2018, we've seen a lot lower percentage of rollover crashes at roundabouts for those heavy commercial vehicles. And then there were those quirky findings in the crash factors that ultimately suggest just kind of clearer guidance for crash reporting. I don't think they probably are not specifically related to heavy commercial crashes themselves, but just more clarification or guidance for officers in the field writing that crash report so that we get a clearer picture of what happened at the crash at the intersection. And if I could go back to the third set of bullet points real quick, one thing that also I noticed from the data is a lot of the rollover crashes were mechanical failure issues. So the truck would either have a brake failure or like one was an axle braking, one was the link between the tractor and the trailer, kind of not braking, but almost separating. And that caused a load shift, which caused the rollover. So even though these happen at roundabouts, did the roundabout contribute to it? It's a yes or no question. It's really a maybe question. Would that have happened if a truck was taking a normal left turn at speed? We don't know. But ultimately, they were at the roundabout, but there were some mechanical issues that could have explained the crashes as well. So last, the link in this slide is active. So if you just want to click it, it'll take you straight to the report. Otherwise, if you just go to our Office of Research and Innovation website and look in the project database, it is project report number 2404 if you want to read the whole thing. And with that, I don't know, depending on how old you are, this is either a Yakov Smirnov joke or a Family Guy joke. I like to end my presentation with it. And with that, I will turn it over to Paul to introduce the other Mark, who is probably more entertaining. I guess we're about to find out.
We shall see, but thank you so much, Mark. Terrific presentation and big kudos on the work that you completed. It's really great to see just the scale of the analysis and some of those conclusions that you reached here. I did just check the Q&A to see if there were any things we wanted to address here, and just give a pat on the back to Scott for offering his thoughts here about the truck weights and how that might have contributed. So again, thank you for participating today, Scott, and for weighing in on that. I think that's a helpful comment here. Not seeing any other, yeah, absolutely. So not seeing any other comments, let's move on to Mark Burnt's presentation. He is a project director for multimodal freight transportation planning at SRF. He began his career with the state of Minnesota, where he worked for more than 20 years and has been with a number of agencies, including MnDOT here. So with that, Mark, thanks again for presenting today, and go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Paul. Let's see. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm one of these people that I find it a little distracting when I'm trying to present and talk to myself. So I'm going to turn off my camera. I would just add to Paul's introduction that I am also a former member of the CTS Transportation Planning and Economy Council. It's been a while, but I was at MnDOT back in the mid 80s to 2001 and participated in the council at that time. So what I'm going to talk about today is really derived from some work that has been going on in the broader community of the Twin Cities and in Minnesota, looking at how we can better support transportation across the state, or better support our economy through transportation across the state. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some prior University of Minnesota research, as well as some other consultant studies that have been done looking at current trends in the economy. I'm going to introduce a relatively new group that has formed sort of organically called the International Commerce Mobility Forum. And then hopefully we can have a little discussion about some potential research needs that are related to this topic and may get some thoughts from those on the webinar today about where we might go in the future. So looking back, I was at MnDOT up until 2001, and in the late 1990s, there was some concern that the availability of air cargo services at MSP may not be sufficient to meet the needs of Minnesota's medtech and high-tech industries. So there was actually a Twin Cities Airports Task Force that was formed. It was led by Bob Johns, the former CTS director, and there was enough concern that there was actually a delegation that traveled to Washington and met with former Congressman Jim Oberstar to express concern about the loss of air cargo to Chicago O'Hare, what we call it air cargo leakage, and we'll talk more about that. But there was also concern that this could potentially affect the ability of high-tech industries in the state to really be successful. And so Congressman Oberstar got some funding. MnDOT hired a consultant, and I was actually the project manager for the first air cargo study that was done looking at this issue. And I left the department in September of 2001, and the final report from that study was published in December. But what I find interesting about this is the university's report talked about this being the first step in building a knowledge base to continue to monitor this issue over time. So some of the key findings from those early studies confirm that export producing industries were a fundamental element of our regional economy, and that in particular, medtech and high-tech sectors were reliant on air cargo. They also found that our current situation at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport is air cargo constrained in terms of when you look at an aerial photo of MSP, you see that it's surrounded, you've got the Minnesota River to the south, you've got the former fort, and I'm drawing a blank, but it's surrounded by other sorts of properties that really constrain it in terms of future land use. So the footprint of MSP is what it is, and there's not a lot of additional area to expand, say, aprons and other facilities for air cargo. And so the early studies really felt that there was a need for a more radical approach. And actually, for a while, there was a dual airport study that was going on through the legislature that later ended. But they were looking at a variety of opportunities to move more air cargo through MSP. And there have been more recent studies continuing to look at this issue. The Humphrey Institute has done a number of industry cluster studies that confirm that we're very much reliant on high-tech industries in our economy. There was the most recent air cargo demand study done by the Metropolitan Airports Commission just wrapped up this last year. And again, these overall, these studies have confirmed that, air cargo services are critically important to our economy. We have land constraints that create formidable barriers or hurdles to expanding air cargo operations. We continue to see air cargo that is trucked from Minnesota and the Twin Cities to Chicago O'Hare. This most recent study that was completed by the Metropolitan Airports last year found their estimate was that approximately 10 to 15 trucks every weekday drive to Chicago to load air cargo onto planes going out of O'Hare. And we'll talk more about why that is in just a second. But a couple of years ago, a new group formed in the Twin Cities, and actually it involves folks from across Minnesota, called the International Commerce Mobility Forum. And it was really spearheaded by Bill Goins. Many of you may know Bill. He's retired from FedEx. He was a global accounts manager who worked with many of the med tech companies in Minnesota, helping them get their cargo needs met. But he was hearing from supply chain managers at those companies that they were still looking for better air cargo access through MSP. So Bill formed the International Commerce Mobility Group as a platform to bring leaders together to begin to discuss supply chain needs in the Twin Cities and greater Minnesota. And so they've been meeting about 4 times a year. The meetings are hybrid meetings. SRF hosts the in-person portion of those. And then there's also opportunities to participate virtually. So air cargo has not been the only issue that the commerce mobility forums have been exploring. In addition to looking at air cargo access, Jan Bauer, who's a representative for the United Kingdom, has been working on a new green shipping corridor between Duluth and the United Kingdom that would move containerized shipments on Lakers. And so that's something that is beginning to build momentum. I know that Jan is looking to put together a delegation of Minnesota companies to go to the UK this next year. ICMF has also been supporting Expo 2031. Some of you may know that Minnesota made a couple of pretty hard runs at trying to attract the World's Fair here to the United States for the first time in many decades. Minnesota was the United States representative for those World Fair bids, but after 2 failed bids, they switched direction a little bit, and it looks like we'll now be hosting Expo 2031, which is a World Horticulture Exposition. Nonetheless, they expect to attract about 6 million visitors for this exposition. So the Commerce Mobility Forum is offered to help with logistics support for that event. And then they've also been promoting the Minnesota Freight Network Optimization Tool. If you're not aware, a couple of years ago, the Minnesota legislature appropriated some funds to create this tool. And the company that I came from before joining SRF is leading that effort, Quetica. And what it does is it uses freight demand data, commodity flow data, to look at opportunities to shift cargo from highways to more efficient, more cost-effective modes. So I think at one time there was maybe some widespread belief that maybe the optimization tool could help look at this air cargo issue, but based on the sort of algorithms that the optimization tool runs, it's really looking for lower cost, more fuel efficient, or lower emission options for moving freight through like rail transload or barge ports, that sort of thing. So it's not likely, at least at this point, to play a significant role in helping to answer the question around air cargo. So getting back to the air cargo issue, currently at MSP, there is international air freight that is flown out of MSP in the belly of passenger planes. And that's the lowest cost option that exporters have that are looking for timely movement of goods to a foreign market by air. So wide body 747s, that sort of thing, they often use the extra space those in the belly of those planes to put air cargo containers. And that is a lot of what Chicago O'Hare does, simply because it flies so many more international passenger routes out of that airport. Other options include all cargo carriers. There are currently no all cargo carriers operating out of MSP. Integrated Express, there is significant integrated express traffic coming in and out of MSP. So think FedEx, UPS, and DHL. And from the early, one of the recommendations in that early 2001 study was to sort of focus on integrated express at MSP, and that's something that has been done. There's been facilities improvements done on the airport proper to accommodate those integrated express carriers, but they tend to be a higher cost service than what you can get moving international cargo through belly freight. And then finally, on-demand freight charters. That's if you needed to get something somewhere sort of, right now, unexpectedly, you can charter an aircraft to do that, but that becomes very expensive. So again, this is just a kind of an indication that, I mean, for a market like MSP in Minnesota with the high technology companies, you'd like to have access to all of these options. And currently it's somewhat limited to the integrated express at MSP. So talking a little bit about why it is these high tech companies use Chicago O'Hare to move their freight. The belly freight is typically facilitated by a freight forwarder. A freight forwarder is someone who will come to your business if you need to move something to an export market. We'll pick it up with a truck, and then we'll consolidate it. Now, some of that freight gets consolidated at MSP and flown out to foreign markets, but a lot of it gets put in a truck, driven to Chicago O'Hare, where maybe it's consolidated with freight coming from other parts of Wisconsin, other parts of Illinois, other parts of Indiana. It gets consolidated there, put into an air cargo container, flown to its destination, and then the forwarder also handles the distribution of the product on the other side of the supply chain, or at the end of the supply chain where it's going to the customer. And so to some extent, there's cost savings by being able to consolidate shipments from a variety of companies in one place and then loading it on to cargo planes. Tracking air cargo exports in this situation is also made more difficult by the federal reporting rules. Customs and Border Patrol allows companies to claim the state of origin for these sorts of shipments at a place of processing or consolidation. So in this little graphic here, it shows, the trucks going into Chicago O'Hare from different markets where it's being consolidated into a container and then put on a wide body aircraft. And so oftentimes Chicago O'Hare or Illinois gets credit for exports that are actually coming from elsewhere. So there's a company called Wiser Trade out of Boston that actually their data product is sold to a lot of international airports, and they did a small analysis where they looked at some select high-tech exports. And so the green bar shows the amount of exports moving out of Minnesota by other modes like truck or rail. Now, if it's high tech, these are likely exports that are moving by truck into Canada or Mexico. Those that are moving by air, you can see the vast majority of air cargo coming out of Minnesota is actually flying through other airports, and a very high percentage of that is through Chicago O'Hare, although there may be some other airports that are used as well. And then the dark blue at the bottom of these bar charts, that's the volume of these commodities that are actually being flown out of MSP. So you can see that MSP is really handling a very small share of Minnesota's export commodities. And according to the most recent state freight plan, the top 3 air cargo commodities by value in the state are precision instruments, electronics, and machinery. So the point of this is really what's going on with Minnesota's broader economy. And these statistics come from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. They have started an annual business benchmarks report. And this last year, it showed that in terms of annual state gross domestic product, we ranked 40th, and that was 5 spots worse than 2022. And in terms of annual exports, we ranked 41st, and we had dropped 26 spots from 2022. Now, some of this may be due to those reporting anomalies, the data anomalies I pointed out. It also may be just, a year-to-year sort of anomaly. But even if you look at Minnesota's situation over time, according to Garrison Keeler, we're always above average in Minnesota. But the fact is, over the last decade, our state economy has been performing below average in terms of gross domestic product growth. And so that's a little bit concerning, and that is one of the issues that the International Commerce Mobility Forum is trying to get a handle on it and see what the state might do from a policy and investment perspective to try and turn that around. It's also one of the reasons we're probably looking at a deficit, a budget deficit into the future, is that our economy just has not been growing as fast as it has in the past. So a quick recap, our economy has a significant high-tech industry component that's heavily dependent on air cargo. There's been a variety of studies in the past, primarily at the university, that have shown that, and there's been other studies done by the Metropolitan Airports Commission that have looked at ways of trying to alleviate that. The land constraint is a significant hurdle. But one of the sort of key findings from some of those early studies, when they talked about a more radical approach, was the idea of trying to use data and technology to try and reverse this trend. So again, some of the predictions made in those early studies suggested that unless there was a radical approach taken, we were going to see a decline in air cargo at MSP, and that has really come true. You can see the trend line here in total air cargo, and this is at a time when you look at other airports, international airports across the United States, I think with the exception of Detroit, most other airports, especially in the Midwest, have been growing air cargo. So back to that early study that was produced back in 2001, one of the recommendations that never came to fruition was to create what they called a next generation regional distribution center. And the key to this was to put all of the freight forwarders, and there's a variety of freight forwarders that operate across the state, and they all operate independently, which is one of the other difficult issues to get sort of a handle on the supply chain, is you've got all these independent operators collecting shipments from different companies, and they're all doing their own thing. The idea was to put all of them on a common data platform where there'd be greater visibility in terms of seeing when there was maybe enough demand to start a direct flight from MSP specifically for cargo. And also to better fill the trucks that are going from Minnesota to Chicago when that is the way of doing business. So in Europe and in Asia, there has in the last decade or so been a system called community cargo systems that has started. They're electronic platforms where all of the people or all of the members involved in an air cargo supply chain are put onto a common platform. This graphic here comes from a company called Kale Logistics. They're an India-based company, but they have an office here in the United States, and they've actually been involved somewhat in the International Commerce Mobility Forums. But they've made presentations around the country. These systems are now being adopted in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Rockford, Illinois, which is a UPS hub. And so it's a way of becoming more efficient. And so at the last International Commerce Mobility Forum, we actually took that concept and began to discuss maybe even a broader approach to this in looking at not just air cargo, but maybe trying to create a multimodal trade platform where any international cargo shipments, whether they are going by ship or rail or truck, would be put through a common trade portal that would give real-time shipment information and allow things like network and route optimization capabilities to better manage those shipments. And so if you're able to use real-time data with something like network or route optimization, you really have developed what might be known as a digital twin. And so we've started exploring this concept, like I said, at the last International Commerce Mobility Forum. And I think it's a conversation we're planning to continue and try and see, could this help sort of shift the trajectory of, the growth of exports and the high tech industries doing those exports from Minnesota. So I'll end there. What I will say is that there was actually a meeting yesterday I was unable to attend between the International Commerce Mobility Forum and CTS. They are planning to do a joint event sometime mid-October this coming year. And so please keep your eye open for that. I'm trying to remember. I thought if you're interested in learning more about the International Commerce Mobility, you can Google it. Government Analytica, which is another Twin Cities-based consulting firm, hosts a web page for the International Commerce Mobility Forum. So you can go ahead and Google that, and they'll take you to the list of past meetings and the meeting minutes and presentations and all that sort of thing. So that's the end of my presentation. I think we're going to do a little poll to see, are there some potential research topics that might contribute to this whole discussion of how do we begin to regain our status in terms of a significant exporter in the high tech and med tech industries. So thank you.
All right, great job, Mark. Thank you so much for sharing that. We covered a lot of ground. So it looks like Sam has posted the poll here, and it is a short answer type poll. So you can type in whatever comes to mind there, if it's just sort of an idea, or if you want to give a little bit longer description of what that research might look like here. So we'll just pause for a moment, let you think about that, and type in some answers. All right. Well, again, thank you. We look forward to reviewing some of those responses here. Sam, were we able to just keep that up for several more minutes? So if things come to mind, people can continue to make entries there?
Yep, absolutely. I will keep the poll running for everyone.
All right. Terrific. Well, thank you again, Sam and Mark, for helping out with that. I did open the Q&A again here, and I see JP offered another suggestion, I think on the same topic, related to the truck rollovers at Roundabouts. So thank you for contributing to that. Maybe that would be another opportunity for Mark Wagner to continue that research. It wouldn't be intractable perhaps to review the dates of those crash records and find some weather records maybe during the same time to see if wind can be factored into there. So thank you. So we'd like to move into our question and answer portion of the event here. As we noted, the Q&A chat feature is still available. So if you're most comfortable typing a question, I will moderate those and do my best to direct them to the presenter that is relevant to. Otherwise, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, you can use the raise hand feature and Sam will help unmute you so you can ask the group directly. Yeah, Ben has a question. Go right ahead. Not seeing Ben unmuted here. Sam, is there anything we want to do to allow
Yeah, Ben, you
question?
should be able to unmute now.
Apologies. I think I'm unmuted now. I did
Yep.
not actually mean to opt into answering a question here, or to asking a question here. Sorry.
But we know it works, so. Excellent. Any others? Okay, I see Maya's entered a question here. Regarding the heavy commercial and roundabout study, was there a notable difference between single and multi-lane roundabouts? So Mark Wagner, I think you did mention that, there are some differences in terms of how trucks navigate that. Is there anything else you'd like to say in terms of what the data showed there?
And nothing additional to say. We didn't break down the roundabouts that specifically in this evaluation. So again, it's another fantastic idea for future investigations into this topic. But yeah, all I could do is point to the past research that says sometimes it is easier for trucks to navigate the wider circulatory road in a multi-lane.
Yeah, so a good topic and probably one that would be important. It's one observation I've made is that, I think there's a lot closer attention to 2-lane and multi-lane roundabouts now, and really trying to kind of use those sparingly, if you will, given some of the navigation issues there. So let's see, Mark Burnt, go right ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Mark Wagner. I was a little surprised by the high percentage of roundabout rollovers for trucks pulling trailers versus semi, because there's very few commercial configurations that use a pintle hook or don't use a fifth wheel, which is typically the definition of a semi trailer, where you have a pintle, or I mean a fifth wheel connection between the tractor and the trailer. So I was curious. Now in Minnesota, you are allowed to pull large construction trailers and even recreational vehicles without a fifth wheel. I was curious if you were able to tell from the data whether some of those rollovers might have been what we might consider, not considered typically commercial vehicles, but just because of the reporting, maybe got recorded that way.
I'm guessing you're onto something, that is probably what's happening here. Is some of those recreational uses are getting grouped in with the commercial uses of trucks pulling trailers, and we didn't tease that out. This was definitely a higher level evaluation, so we didn't get that detailed in the analysis.
Very good. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, great presentation. There's so much to think about, and making sure we consider freight when in all these things. I I was curious if anyone had thought about it. This would be hard in the higher level research too, but just seeing that there were fewer rollovers, in more recent years, and part of that might be the design, but I wonder if some of that's due to just experience, right? I mean, I don't know if there's a way to go back and ask some of those drivers, like, was this your first roundabout, or how many, like when you sort of new to learning how to drive around roundabouts, and if there's any experience. So we'll continue to see improvement just over time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's entirely possible some of this was just due to unfamiliarity as well, in addition to those design standards. Yeah, I guess I don't know exactly how we would track those drivers down, but it is something, from the narratives we might be able to tease out some of those answers as well.
Yep, hard to research that, but just something to think about. Yep.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks, Lisa. A couple other questions that have come up in the Q&A here. Mark asks, were there advisory or warning signs added to assist drivers if there's significant rollovers?
Not that I'm aware of. At the two, I guess, problem child roundabouts that I was talking about, I am not aware of any additional signing that was added for speed reductions, in addition to what, on top of what's already installed with roundabouts as a standard practice.
Okay. And then another question here. This one looks like it's going to Mark Burns' presentation. Are there any specific emerging industries that are growing in Minnesota or elsewhere that could especially benefit from more robust and connected air freight system?
Yeah, well, I think the short answer to that is e-commerce. So Amazon is the one big addition to MSP. They've always had the presence of DHL, FedEx, and UPS, but in recent years, Amazon has also been added to the list, and simply consumer expectations of being able to get products. I think many of the e-commerce companies are guaranteeing any place, anytime in, I don't know, it's like 24 hours or less than 72. So you know for a long time, air cargo generally was in decline globally, simply because it is an expensive mode of transportation. And so the forecasts were very slow growth. But with the advent of e-commerce, it's really become a growing market. I think even more of the passenger airlines during the pandemic, e-commerce made up a significant share of passenger airlines profitability, or it at least cut their losses. So that's one thing that's making a difference in terms of the volume of air cargo that's being moved.
So I had a follow-up one for that. So before we go to the next one that's in the Q&A, Paul, I don't know if I'll jump in here. So Mark, I was kind of interested too in some of the emerging industries, and my mind was going to some of these medical industries and custom devices or things that are needed for an upcoming surgery. Is that something that you've heard too, or? I know we've got so many medical device companies in Minnesota, and I know sometimes those things are custom for a specific patient and they need to be quickly delivered if there's a surgery coming up or something. So I'm curious if that's one of the industries that benefits from this.
Well, I think it is. And you also have, the whole medical complex in Rochester. I mean, Mayo does a lot of testing for other health facilities. So one of the big products that's in the list of top commodities moving by air cargo is basically, I can't remember the scientific terminology, but it's tests that are being moved in and out of Rochester on a daily basis. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago in Cincinnati, in Ohio, and Minnesota is actually part of a group that are looking at autonomous aircraft and drones. And I heard a presentation at that conference where they talked about especially these very high demand, patient specific sorts of products or tests that, whether it could be, let's say, a deterrent of flying a regular cargo plane. And so they were looking at the use of autonomous aircraft and small drones to be able to still move very, time sensitive products, especially into more rural areas. And so that may be another opportunity in the future is to look at the use of autonomous aircraft to begin to move more of these products, not only in local markets, but in broader markets as well.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Let's see, another suggestion here from Scott about the single lane versus multi-lane roundabout for further research here. So good comment there. And I think that's now a couple votes for that as a future research topic. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's been entered in the poll as well, but we'll certainly add it to our list coming away from this. So thank you for that. Another Q&A here with the implementation of autonomous driving technologies for commercial vehicles. Is there any technical guidance designed into those systems to help vehicles safely use roundabouts? Mark, are you aware if any of that has anything related to that at MnDOT?
I am not aware of any technical guidance at this time. I think the goal of any autonomous vehicle is to be able to ultimately use the road more safely than a human driver. So, that almost kind of comes with the development in a way, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's right. And in terms of how much of that autonomy is driven by, real-time sensing of the roads versus, sort of pre-programmed knowledge of the system here. So, say I had another question. This, kind of is a continuation on one that was asked a few minutes ago about some of the warning signs. You mentioned that some of those problematic roundabouts are really from kind of a first generation of roundabout deployment in the state. Is there a low-cost opportunity to retrofit those roundabouts to try to address some of the safety issues that you have observed?
That's a really good question. I would say if you're going to address curb type, that's going to be not necessarily a low-cost retrofit because you're going to be tearing up the island of a roundabout. So I guess, yeah, your low-cost interventions are probably going to be something on approach to the roundabout or relatively, surface treatment level stuff. But changing that curb type is probably a much bigger lift than other things.
No, very good. Well, it's also remarkable, I think, how, that technology has changed, if you will, or those design standards in just a few years here.
Yeah.
Maybe last one here for you, Mark Wagner, is would you see a role for the freight community in addressing this, whether that is engaging, representatives in the design process to help, to have a voice in some of those updated standards, or maybe it's more of an education component? Anything that might be there?
So one of the things that came out of the research from the past was education, that making commercial vehicle operators more aware of roundabouts and how to drive them, and the specifics of them will help. And I think Lisa's question/statement kind of got at that as well. But I think the other opportunity for commercial vehicle operators is when there are roundabout projects proposed to be involved in the design process. That's where we learn a lot about what kind of vehicles we're going to need to accommodate at that intersection. And, even within the, there's multiple curb types, even just for the sloped ones that we use, and how do we design the approach splitter islands as well to be able to accommodate a truck hauling a wind turbine blade, which is, incredibly long, or a logging truck or something like that, which have very different needs depending on, what they're carrying. So that would be my other recommendation, is for operators to really be aware of what's going on around them.
Yeah, great suggestion. Thank you, Mark.
Mhm.
All right, looks like we did get a PDH question in here. So Sam, if you would be so kind, maybe follow up with Shaheen here to see about resolving that. I just did have one more question for Mark Burnt here. Obviously a lot of great information, as well as maybe some sobering, kind of reality check on Minnesota's export economy here. And I think some of your conclusions maybe started to get at this, but to put you on the spot, what would you see as some key features of a response from the transportation community that most of us would see ourselves as part of, to try to influence or reverse that decline? And maybe further, would that response be different whether it was sort of, I don't want to say a go it alone, but something that the transportation community did more in isolation versus as part of consortium of multiple industries?
Yeah, great question, Paul. I think this whole idea about this digital trade platform really grew out of some work that happened during the pandemic at USDOT. I actually had a chance to meet the White House supply chain chief, retired General Stephen Lyons, at a TRB conference a couple years ago. And that was the start of the USDOT Flow project, the Freight Logistics Optimization Works, which is actually a data platform that there's a number of Twin Cities companies, Llano Lakes, Target, and the large freight forwarder C.H. Robinson all contribute data to that platform, as well as most of the coastal gateway ports, most of the major railroads now, a lot of major trucking companies, and a lot of large companies. The last time I looked, I think the list of participants in that data exchange was over 50 major companies across the United States. The goal of that data platform was to identify hiccups in the supply chains. This really took off after we saw, ships stacked up out in the ocean waiting to get into LA, Long Beach, and other ports, because we had these, huge surge and thing in terms of demand and then the ability to produce. And so that ability to sort of see into what was actually happening in real time in the supply chains helped alleviate those bottlenecks. And that's really what this platform would be about. I mean, the issue is always data confidentiality, right? One company doesn't want to give away their data to another company. So the big hurdle that USDOT had to get over in order to create the Flow program was making sure that the data was compartmentalized and that everyone was in agreement in terms of how it would be used. And I think, this original recommendation back in 2001 that all the freight forwarders in Minnesota would go onto the common platform. Again, the idea wasn't to share data between the forwarders, but to be able to understand where you could create efficiencies and do things better. And then if there is a bottleneck, react to it in real time. And so I think that's what we're talking about here. I do think that could, again, I think the first step in that process is developing some data standards around how, the data would be used and what the policies would be, and that. And we're seeing that happen in other places. At the last CTS awards banquet, we had a presentation from City of Minneapolis about their curbside management, where essentially they're creating a digital platform around how curb space is being used to better manage and make it available at the right times to commercial vehicle operators. So I think this whole frontier around digital data platforms and being able to react in real time is something we're just on the cusp of, and could create a real game changer. And so I think what we're trying to do through the International Commerce Mobility Forums is try and get Minnesota out ahead of the curve in that adoption of these digital technologies.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Mark. I think what that kind of speaks to me is that, we generally have seen kind of the public sector transportation as in the role of an infrastructure provider. But in that instance, infrastructure doesn't just mean steel and concrete, but, those data standards or kind of open platforms, if you will, for sharing data and things like that. So, to no one's surprise, what the industry is being asked to do or how it can facilitate is a lot different maybe than it looked like in generations past. So
Right.
Very good. Well, thanks again to our presenters today. Wonderful job, Mark Wagner and Mark Burnt. Terrific information that you've shared here. I'm not seeing any more questions or raised hands at the moment. So unless anything else is up here, I think we can move on. So Lisa, I invite you to take us into the round robin.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So we always this this is our webinar and presentation, but it's also our council meeting. And one of the important things at the council meetings is to provide this forum for practitioners to share with each other about issues they're facing, and then academics and researchers to hear the type of thing that we have questions about, so they can think about how to research it. So this is our chance to do a little round robin and think about things that you're facing that you are, want to talk about. In this time, you can share ideas for that, or just any events or updates or things that are happening too. So it doesn't have to just be research ideas. Or it could be things about potential future speakers too. So if you've got an idea of a project that you'd like to hear us have at a future meeting. So anyway, I will start. So my title is Community Connections Director, and like I said, or maybe I didn't say this, that I respond to community requests for non-transportation uses of the right-of-way. So a lot of things like public art and use of some of the vacant land that MnDOT owns. And of course, most of these places are, they're all on MnDOT right-of-way, so they're near interstates or very busy facilities. And a lot of those places, kind of are places that, since they're vacant, they can attract crime and unwanted behaviors. So I'm just, as we do some more of these like placemaking and public art and using the spaces, working with communities to put in skate parks or public art, I'd be interested to see a research project that looks at, how does this placemaking and public art help reduce vandalism, crime, and other negative activities. So that's what's going on in my world, and what I'm interested to see how effective that is. And with that, anybody else want to share things that are going on in your organization or ideas for research? Feel free to raise your hand, and Sam can unmute you or turn your option to unmute on. Paul, I don't know if you've got anything going on at SRF or.
Well, there was one thing that I wanted to note here, and I'll make another plug for a CTS related activity. Minneapolis will be hosting the Modeling Mobility Conference coming up in September. And this is really one of the kind of premier conferences for the travel modeling community here. So we would expect to see, travel demand modelers from, around the country and even around the world. So I'm very excited for that event. Of course, both to learn and exchange ideas with that community, but of course also to show off our city and our state here. So I'm sure you'll see more about that to come as CTS is also assisting with the planning for that event. But certainly encourage everyone to look into attending that here in September.
Oh, that is exciting. There's so much changing in the world and technology and the ability to use phones and other tracking devices to integrate that in with modeling software. So that'll be really exciting to have that conference here in Minnesota. I know we can see our list of attendees. Anybody that we see on the list that we want to call on? So James or Samantha, is there anything going on with CTS that you want to alert people to?
To be honest, I think Paul hit it with the Modeling Mobility Conference. I know that's a big one that we're working with folks not only here in Minnesota, but all throughout the nation to pull together. That link in the chat does take you to the Modeling Mobility website. Registration is now open. So if you're looking to attend, please register as soon as you can.
Great. And I don't have the dates in front of me, but the MASTO conference is coming up this summer here in Minnesota as well. If anybody's got information on that, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm not part of the planning committee, but I know a lot of my colleagues are talking about it all the time.
I believe the dates for that are the same week in August that the state fair starts.
Okay.
Maybe not the exact same days, but it is the same week.
And that's the Midwest, the Association for State Transportation Officials, I think is what it stands for. So there'll be people from Midwest states here for that event.
Yeah, Mid-America, the dates are August 25th through the 27th.
Great, thanks. All right, well, I guess another thing to just remind people of, if you're not a member or a friend of the CTS councils, if you heard about this another way and you're not on our mailing list, I think Samantha put the information in the chat about how to find out more about CTS research councils, and anyone can be a friend of the council. So if you want your name added to the friend list, go ahead and let us know. And then over time, people that are involved with CTS can eventually become members of the council, and someday you might get asked to chair or vice chair, like Paul and I. So great. Well, if no one else has any other announcements, so I'll go back and look at the chat. Nope, nobody put anything else in the chat that I can see. So I guess we can wrap it up and give everybody back about 6 minutes. Enjoy your holiday weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.